There's been some pretty serious conversations in the street art community about appropriation recently. It's kind of hard to think about street art without considering appropriation. As a movement, it's built off it. The early works of stencil artists like Banksy or Nick Walker subverted recognizable or iconic imagery. That's what made the whole scene popular. This whole conversation has got me thinking about the meeting point between freedom of expression and cultural appropriation. In this video, I'm going to investigate why something that looks harmless to many would actually be considered problematic to others. And most importantly, I'm going to try and find out what separates these two. This video is going to focus predominantly on the use of Asian stereotypes, but the concept as a whole is open to absolutely any type of culture. You might even say this video is going to focus on cultural appropriation. I don't think that's right. Before we get into the video, I want to clear a few things up. It's almost impossible to come into a conversation like this without preloaded opinions. For some, it's a matter of being able to reclaim a sense of heritage or identity. And for others, it's political correctness gone mad. It's a restriction on our rights to free speech. I'm not asking you to agree with everything or even anything discussed in this video, but I do ask that you watch it with an open mind. This whole thing kicked off recently when the UK-based Irish artist Findak found himself at the centre of a very heated conversation for the portrayal of young Asian women in his work. Now, I have a personal relationship with Finn. We've worked on projects together over the years. Some of my very first video work was with Finn, and I've actually never found his work to be problematic. But when a group of Asian women started speaking out online, I thought it was an important time to listen. To help shine a light on this, I've invited the LA-based artist Allison Torneros, more commonly known as Hueman, and the Malaysian-based artist Sheena Liam to help talk us through why this conversation may have arisen. For the record, and I cannot emphasize this enough, this video is in no way an attempt to cancel anyone. All I'm trying to do is create space for reflection that's away from the intensity of an Instagram comments thread. While the story of Findak certainly was a catalyst for this wider conversation, this is not about any one artist. It's a viewpoint that should be extended to the entire culture. I'd also like to state that I did invite Finn on to talk with me, but he has politely declined. I started by asking Allison how she saw Asian women portrayed as she was growing up.
I mean, growing up, I didn't really see much of Asian women in society unless it was, what was that movie? Where is that? Was it Apocalypse Now? Or which one was it? Where the girl, there's like a Asian prostitute and she goes, "Me love you long time."
Honey, me so horny. Me love you long time.
I remember growing up with that phrase. I mean, immediately knowing how offensive it was. And so in pop culture and in media and in general society, Asian women have been often portrayed as sex workers or like the punchline of a joke. And it's often silent. There's usually, when you see Asian people on like any sort of film or any sort of anything, they're just kind of background. And it's been awesome to see how much it's changed just even in the last like 5 years. We are going in like a great direction. But for the most part, growing up, I didn't really get to see much of any sort of representation of anyone that looked like me, except maybe Tia Carrera in Wayne's World or something.
Not gonna lie though, Mike Myers didn't do quite the same thing for the Scots.
He kinda looks like a baby. Come here, I'm gonna eat you! I'm bigger than you, I'm higher in the food chain! Get in my belly!
I asked Sheena Liam how stereotypes featured in her life.
So there are many problematic stereotypes associated with Asian women, like being submissive, being sex workers. I think I have some additional insights to this because before I explored art, I was modeling as means to travel. And I remember going to castings and seeing like the room full of Asian women. And I knew already like it's going to be a casting for a geisha or a nail salon girl or anime blue-haired character trope. So we do see all of this as very harmless, but I think now with the recent massage parlor shootings, we are having to deal with the very real world consequences of these stereotypes that are being perpetuated.
If we take a look at the use of a geisha, for example, I can think of several artists in the UK alone that regularly paint this image. The thing I find really fascinating about this is that there's so many interesting elements of history and myth that you could spore within geisha culture, such as the fact that the first geishas were actually men. But these narratives don't seem to feature as part of the work that I'm discussing here. I think when someone tries to remove the history and the context of the culture that they're depicting, this is where it starts to become problematic. Because all you're really leaving is a graphic interpretation of something exotic. Imagery, just like words, doesn't exist without some kind of context. Why is it problematic for a white Western artist to paint a geisha?
I don't think that painting a geisha is necessarily problematic, but okay, long story short, documenting a culture, appreciating a culture, and learning all that the culture has to offer is not the problem. But what's the problem is when you cherry pick and amplify certain things, such as, you know, sex workers being in their situation because of societal economical conditions that most immigrant women are forced into. It really serves as a tool to perpetually keep them in that state.
It's problematic because when you look at just the history of colonization and Western societies going over to other communities of color and basically dominating them and saying, this is ours now. There's been so much fetishization of women by white men. I mean, you go to Thailand and you go to the red light districts and it's just, I mean, I went to Thailand on my honeymoon and I was just taken aback by how much just the dynamics of white men with all these Asian women. And it was weird and it was gross. And it was because they're definitely perpetuating that stereotype.
Would geishas and things like that be something? And this is what's quite funny, because every time I've seen a geisha painted or some of the imagery that I'm discussing, but predominantly the image that always comes back is the geisha. Like, I've seen the hypersexualized women, but and actually it was funny because when I texted you and you said that this is going to be a video, your first response was, should I come dressed as a schoolgirl? And it's like, you know, there's a couple of these tropes that kind of keep recurring.
They keep recurring because people keep, you know, portraying the woman like that, and it's definitely problematic. If you want to say porn is not problematic and the way, you know, women are portrayed in porn is not problematic, and definitely brainwashing a whole generation of men to treat women a certain way, like, it's problematic. And I think context is very important, especially with public art. Like, is it there just to be a beautiful picture, or is it there to serve, you know, a stronger narrative, which is very important that artists should consider. You guys aren't graphic designers, you know, you're artists. You want to say something. What is it you want to say?
I don't have too much of a problem with cultural appropriation as long as you provide some sort of context or you add something of meaning to that conversation. You know, if you've been inspired by, I don't know, Asian symbols or anything Asian or from any other culture, like, I would want to know, where are you pulling that influence from? What's the context here? How are you adding to this and adding value to it, like, as your perspective as a white male or any other person who tries to take from another culture?
What's the difference then between, you know, acknowledging a culture and appropriating a culture?
I think appreciation and acknowledgement stems from love and wanting to understand a part of a culture that is not your own. That's fair. Clearly exploring the multi-facets the culture has to offer. I never saw it problematic when non-Chinese individuals wear like the qipao or the samfu. But when it is a costume and you're wearing it to a theme party, like a easy, sleazy Japanesey party, like, you don't have to be a genius to know what's offensive and what's not, you know? I guess when you don't single out one certain trait or one certain person, do you understand what I mean? And you don't like only benefit of painting Asian women working as sex workers or only painting Japanese women as geishas. Like when you are a painter to document life and document everything, I don't see why that's a problem. I don't see how that would be a problem.
Political correctness as a term is often found weaponized by the right as a way of portraying the left as imposing restrictions upon our freedoms of speech. The reality is that no matter what side of the political spectrum you find yourself on, you probably already openly, voluntarily adhere to some form of political correctness. What about the people that have said, that have the attitude that even having this conversation, it's like, oh, that's PC culture, everyone's too woke now and you can't say anything and this is, we're losing our right to freedom of speech. What would be your response to that?
There's a middle ground to be had with all of that. There were definitely, growing up like conservative Asian, I had a lot of prior ideologies that were wrong and I did not know was correct until I learned from, PC culture that they said, oh, you can't say that word anymore. You can't say things like that. And the difference was that I listened and I learned. It's not going to change overnight, but if you're listening and considering the wider consequences of your actions, that would really help to build a better society. You're not going to brainwash and be a whole different person by the next day, but slowly, change it. It's growth. Everyone grows. And I think we should give like some of these artists space to grow as well. And I hope they are listening. They're ready to listen.
If an Asian woman, and especially an Asian artist, is trying to tell you that this is flat out wrong, maybe you should try to listen, try to keep an open ear and try to understand where I'm coming from. So it's about respect. It's about respect and appreciating where these things come from and the dynamics at play with white men fetishizing Asian women. I mean, there's literally a term for that, and it's yellow fever. And it's something that I've had to deal with in my dating life when I've dated guys who weren't Asian. And those guys have always, in the beginning, would get shit from their friends and be like, you're into Asians now. Like this is some category on Pornhub. Like, oh, you're into Asians now.
It's funny that Allison said that because there was actually another phrase that came to mind throughout all this, and it's orientalism. Coined by the Palestinian-American activist and scholar Edward Said in 1978, Orientalism refers to the portrayal of Arab and Asian cultures as inferior to the West. In relation to recent pop culture, this would be the portrayal of one-dimensional roles for actors, where women are exotic belly dancers and men are barbaric fundamentalists. In a political landscape, Orientalism is a tool that helps amplify the idea of Western superiority.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
The PC culture and all that stuff and the canceling people, and it irritates me. I for the most part, like, I don't know, like the headlines I've seen is Kourtney or Kim Kardashian got cornrows, so now she's trying to be black, or she's putting bronzer on her face, now she's trying to do blackface. It's like, no, like I feel like people do reach a lot in PC culture, and it irritates the shit out of me, and I'm just like, no, we're not going to cancel everything. It's just not what I want to do. But this is what it's about, is sexualizing Asian women and then basically saying fuck you Asian women, I'm going to do what I want. All of this stuff with BLM and also just being in isolation, and people don't want to stay doing the same things and letting the same things slide by. The moment that you show disrespect to the culture that you pull from, I have to step in and say something.
Allison then reminded me of a 2018 story with the artist bostanton. On the invitation of the LA Schools District, Bo had painted a mural depicting the actress Ava Gardner on the side of a school in Koreatown. Drawing parallels with the imagery found on the imperialist Japanese flag, the local community group claimed that the mural stood as a reminder of the bloody history between the two nations and demanded its removal.
Something in the LA Times in defense of him, because I was there when he painted the mural. I was one of the other muralists, and I guess there were people in the Koreatown community that were saying his mural was offensive, and this is where I'm coming from with the PC culture, because like at the same time I also can't stand how we're constantly trying to cancel everyone. And this guy who was the, I guess, spokesperson for this group, he was demanding that the school paint over his mural. And if you know Bo, and I don't even know Bo that well, but from all the times I've met him, he is literally one of the sweetest, most genuine people you will ever meet. And if you know about his work at all, you know that he has, it's like a starburst motif that he does in all of his work. That's just, you think of bostanton and you think of those sun rays. 2 or 3 years after he had painted it, they were like, no, those sun rays are like the imperial
Japanese
Japan, like flag thing, and it's offensive because of Japan's history with Korea, and I understand that. I completely understand where that's coming from, but again, context. And if you look at the context of Bo's work and I don't even think that the colors were even anything close to what that was. It was like more of an orange than a red. And yeah, if you look at context of his work, like that's literally motif of his work. And I'm pretty sure Bo doesn't want to create an entire body of work based on conflict between those two. And I don't think that's what Bo was trying to do. So it was just so unfair to me that they could say, let's just whitewash the entire thing. A Korean girl, I remember getting into this whole conversation with this Korean girl who was basically saying that I was a traitor to my race or whatever, and that I'm supporting these white men and blah blah blah. And I'm like, no, because I am Asian, because I'm an Asian person, I want to provide some perspective to these people and show them, look, I was there, and look, I know this guy, and I know that that's not what's going on here. He's not trying to be offensive, and to completely erase something without even trying to come up with some other sort of solution is that's just not okay. I don't think we should just be canceling people just without any sort of conversation being had first, because I don't think we should be whitewashing everything just because we don't like it or just because we're offended by it.
There's nothing black and white about the points we've discussed in this video, and I really don't believe we should be writing anyone off. I do believe though that these are important moments to fully reflect on how imagery and stereotype affect people. Thanks to Allison and Sheena for agreeing to participate in this conversation with me. This video is not about singling any one artist out, it's about encouraging you as an audience or a creator to consider the power dynamics in the work that you are seeing or creating. Let me know in the comments how you feel about this. I'll be back with you guys real soon. Till then, take care of yourselves. My name's Doug. This was Fifth Wall TV.